In 1960, a film by a very distinguished British director would shock audiences and incense critics, dismissing the film as provocative and sleazy B-movie trash. The controversy surrounding the film in question would practically end an illustrious career, and it would take decades for the film to be re-evaluated as a groundbreaking and innovative classic. The film in question is not Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, but Michael Powell's Peeping Tom. Michael Powell had a real passion and obsession for cinema, and he worked his way up from the silent era as an assistant and stills photographer. His first break would come when he worked closely with Hitchcock on the screenplay for Blackmail, which was Hitchcock's first talkie. Powell would later find his feet as a director during the so-called quota quickie era, churning out up to 7 films a year due to a scheme by the British government to flood cinemas with British films and stimulate the British film industry. This would prove a great training ground, but Powell would ultimately rise to prominence and perhaps is best known for his work with longtime collaborator Emeric Pressburger. Michael Powell and Emeric Pressburger met in the late 1930s, and their partnership would be one of the most fruitful collaborations in British cinema. Under the production banner of the Archers, Powell and Pressburger made 19 feature films where they shared the credit of producer, writer and director. Their films included The Life and Death of Colonel Blimp, I Know Where I'm Going, A Matter of Life and Death, The Red Shoes, Black Narcissus and The Tales of Hoffman, to name a few. This selection of films are widely regarded as some of the best British films of all time, if not in cinema as a whole, but they also demonstrate Powell's visual flair and ability to push the form of cinema beyond reality and into fantasy and expressionism. He would create vivid worlds that would combine colour, movement, music and spectacle to create emotionally charged films that were way ahead of their time. What stands out most about the Archer's work from this era is how modern and advanced the filmmaking language is. The films are almost timeless. At the end of this creative period, Powell had the inclination that audiences had evolved and became interested in wider subjects and more sophisticated films, and perhaps it's this notion that drew him to give the audience a more challenging spectacle. Peeping Tom tells the story of awkward loner Mark Lewis, played by Carl Böhm. Never seen without his camera, Mark is an obsessive camera buff who behind his timid exterior is actually a serial killer who films his victims as he murders them by stabbing them to death with a spike on the end of his tripod. When Mark meets the innocent Helen, played by Anna Massey, his feelings of attraction to her create an inner conflict between his obsession for killing and his desire to be loved, culminating in a shocking climax that's as bleak and disturbing now as it was upon its release. Powell's lurid and colourful exploration of obsession, voyeurism and murder didn't shy away from showing the inner workings of a broken mind.
What causes people to be peeping toms? Scoptophilia, that would interest him. Most fertile mind. Scoptophilia, the morbid urge to gaze.
Much like Hitchcock's Rear Window, Peeping Tom is a film that explores voyeurism. All throughout the film, we see Mark watching. We're immersed into his point of view when he's committing his murders. We see them almost exclusively through the camera, witnessing the terror firsthand. After he commits his murders, he watches them back on his projector, trying to recapture the moment. But we also see Mark unwittingly invading people's privacy as he looks through windows, watching people as if he's watching a movie.
Why don't we make him a present of that window? He practically lives there.
Other references to watching and the act of seeing include a newsagent who secretly sells pictures of naked girls to customers, called Views.
Well, he won't be doing the crossword tonight.
Another example is Mark saying he works for the Observer newspaper while filming the scene of one of his murders. And finally, it's revealed that Mark was filmed and observed by his father from a young age as part of a scientific experiment. But the most apparent aspect is the fact that Mark always seems to be watching everyone from a distance. He simply can't look away, and it's his camera that emboldens him and brings him closer to his desires.
Don't be shy of me. It's my first time too.
Yours?
In front of eyes, like eyes as full of
all this filming isn't healthy, and that you need help. Get it, Mark.
Mark's camera is an extension of himself. Cameras have been part of his life from a young age, and his camera is always by his side. He's literally joined at the hip to it, and in one scene we see his separation anxiety as he's convinced by Helen to leave his camera at home when they go out on a date. The point is underlined further when he stumbles upon a couple kissing in some bushes, and he instinctively reaches for his camera only to realise it isn't there. The camera helps Mark to understand the world. He processes information and emotion through images. Things are only authentic to him when they're filmed, but as a result, due to his naive nature, it's evident that he's never experienced anything for real. In particular, Mark's murders become a way of compensating for his inexperience with women.
There he goes again. What have you got under there, a girlfriend? I suppose you have a girlfriend.
No, Minnie.
Hear that, Lorraine? He's available.
Empowered by the camera, Mark not only captures images, but captures his victims. Mark's camera and tripod become a weapon which he uses to instill fear and inflict pain on his victims. Powell suggests the phallic nature of Mark's murder weapon with suggestive gestures, as well as Mark's arousal while he kills. He's aroused by their fear, and by stabbing them with his tripod, he's essentially penetrating their bodies as they scream for their lives, and with those screams came the birth of a new genre, the slasher film. The origin of the slasher film can be traced back to some of the first serial killer movies, such as Alfred Hitchcock's silent murder mystery, The Lodger, and Fritz Lang's M. Following that, we can see some of the conventions in haunted house movies, such as William Castle's House on Haunted Hill and The House of Wax, which in many ways owed their structure to the whodunit of Agatha Christie. Fate would yet again bring Michael Powell and Alfred Hitchcock together as the originators of the slasher genre as we know it, with Peeping Tom and Psycho. The influence could be seen in the 60s with Italian giallo movies such as Mario Bava's Kill Baby Kill and Blood and Black Lace, but also in B-movie offerings such as Dementia 13 by Francis Ford Coppola and Bloody Pit of Horror, which again sees models being bumped off one by one during photo shoots. The genre would evolve in American cinema in the early 70s and 80s, with movies such as Tobe Hooper's The Texas Chainsaw Massacre and of course John Carpenter's Halloween. This would give birth to movies such as Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, and several iterations of sleepaway camp type movies, which would become strong staples of the horror genre in the 80s in particular. In the 90s we would see the genre reach its peak in popularity, with movies such as I Know What You Did Last Summer and the blockbusting postmodern Scream franchise.
What's your favorite scary movie?
I don't know.
You have to have a favorite. What comes to mind?
Halloween.
In all of these films, we see reworkings of the conventions of the genre that first appeared in Psycho and Peeping Tom. The conventions are graphic depictions of murder, usually filmed from the point of view of the killer, psychological trauma from a dysfunctional upbringing, such as Mark being experimented on by his father, or Norman Bates' obsession with his mother,
A boy's best friend is his mother.
which would be echoed by such famous slashers such as Jason Voorhees and Michael Myers. And these conventions always add up to the killing of young, sexually active women similar to Janet Leigh in Psycho or the models in Peeping Tom. But the one convention we must never forget in the slasher film is the final girl.
Be safe as long as I can't see you frightened. So stand in the shadows, please. Please.
Despite its graphic nature, the slasher film could be accused of being part of a very puritanical genre, but the genre is merely playing out the anxieties and arrested development of their killers. In Peeping Tom, Mark's victims are depicted as confident, sexually active women. In the opening scene, Mark murders a prostitute, and in later scenes, he murders models and then an actress who's again confident in her body, and therefore, Mark finds these women threatening, and he asserts his dominance by frightening them and slaughtering them.
You're going up to see him?
May I?
We both have the key of the door. Mine needs oiling. Yours needs exercise.
The final girl is the exception to this rule. She's usually the hero who defeats the slasher, or spared due to her perceived purity. In Peeping Tom, Helen is a naive and inexperienced girl who's portrayed as very wholesome. She's even a librarian. It's her purity that not only makes her appealing, but also unthreatening to Mark. When Mark gazes at her, there's no overwhelming arousal, only comfort as they exchange looks. For Mark, Helen represents a chance to free himself from his compulsions and fetishes, and it's this hope that leads us to the film's disturbing conclusion.
Turn it off.
The result must be so perfect that the risks don't count. So perfect that even he Even he would say.
Who's he? Don Jarvis?
Peeping Tom is a film about obsession, but it's not only Mark's obsession to watch and to kill, but also the obsession to filmmaking itself. Just like the countless takes required to make the perfect shot, Mark kills repeatedly and films his murders as he's also searching for something perfect in the images he shoots, in the hope that he will resolve the trauma within himself. But sadly, he never finds it. Towards the end, Helen's mother, who's blind, and who's ironically the only one who can figuratively see Mark's true nature, warns him that he needs to put an end to whatever's troubling him and seek help if he wants to continue seeing Helen. However, when Mark meets a psychotherapist, he tells him there's no immediate fix, and crestfallen, he commits one more murder in the hope that it will be his last. He's unaware that the tables have already been turned on him, and he's the one being watched by police, and they see him leave the scene of one of his murders. When Mark returns home, he finds Helen in his studio, and she's discovered the footage of his murders, forcing Mark to confess and also demonstrate how he carried out the murders.
Do you know what the most frightening thing in the world is? It's fear. So I did something very simple. I made them watch their own deaths. I made them see their own terror as the spike went in. And if death has a face, they saw that too.
As he acts out the murders, the police suddenly arrive at Mark's studio, and realizing he's trapped, believes that his only escape is to take his own life by filming his own suicide, immortalizing himself forever, and dying in a moment of ecstasy as he witnesses his own fear. It's perhaps the first time he feels an authentic emotion, and with that, maybe he finds peace. In many ways, Mark's death is symbolic of Michael Powell, who fell on his own sword and sacrificed his own career at the altar of cinema by pushing the boundaries in order to frighten the audience and show them something new. The negative attention the film received was perhaps because it was too close to the bone. Film critics and audiences alike perhaps saw it as a condemnation of their desire to watch, to be voyeurs. But it seems that Michael Powell was right. Today, the camera and the screen is always in our pocket, already in the palm of our hand, and it's become a modern condition to document the smallest details of our lives, disconnecting us from reality. Powell knew that we just can't look away, and reminds us of this with his final shot of an empty frame. The film has run out, but we're still watching and waiting for more spectacle, or perhaps the perfect ending. So that's my take on Peeping Tom. Thanks for watching. See you next time.
Whatever I photograph, I always lose.
I don't understand.